And I really wonder where all that anti-establishment stuff came that happened in those days. Part of it certainly was the police, and the police were a big issue. And it's hard for probably the merchants to hear that because at the same time as I did, you see people victimizing themselves out there on the street. You'd see somebody passed out, and the aid car would come pick them up, and you think, okay, that's going to teach them, this is sort of a life they shouldn't be leading. But that didn't happen, and people kept being drawn, especially to the lower Ave. If there's any of it now, it seems to be more on the upper Ave, which is a huge surprise. But the Ave was like there was this anti-establishment attitude, which I think partly from the people on the street came a lot from the people on the street because of the police, and merchants were caught in the middle. What do we do? In some ways we don't want this, but we're not exactly anti-establishment, and then the students would be sympathetic with the kids on the street, but not really. I'm not even so sure they were in that sense. They were certainly against the war. And you saw them out in the 70s protesting the war. But I think that the drugs just seem to come and go on the Ave. It's just a shame. I was very fortunate, especially since I never had a business course in my life. My dad underwrote my loans from the bank in the very beginning. I didn't even know, and I still wouldn't know really how to do a business plan. And there would be a line of credit, and I would take off, whether I was traveling to Mexico or Peru or wherever it might be, and use a certain amount of that up, and then be expected to have it paid off by Christmas. And I did that year after year for probably 10 to 14 years, borrowed from the bank in order to make it go. And how did I educate myself? I would educate myself by spending a lot of time in museums and classes. I eventually ended up teaching at the U about folk art because that's what I cared so much about, were things that people made with their hands. And I don't think I ever had difficulty. I think my first landlord, who was Mr. Ness, who was a Sephardic Jew, I think he had a lot of respect for me as a woman, and fortunately my dad did. And I remember when the women's movement came along, I was already doing this, and I can remember and I'm sorry to say this, but I was sort of resentful of my dad having to be involved at all. And then the movement came along, and I realized that there's no way in a million years I could have done it by myself with owning nothing and not sure what I was going to do next situation. So as a woman, I think I never was treated differently than anybody else. That's how I felt, quite frankly.